Hello, my name is Gavrilut Dragos, and I'm a director for the Cyber Threat Intelligence Lab in Bitdefender. I've been dealing with cybersecurity for more than 15 years now, and I can actually tell you that for every or pretty much every attack that I have ever analyzed could have been stopped if proper measure would have been taken to prevent it. And there is always some risks somewhere within the attack steps that if somebody actually understands them and makes some effort to prevent them, can actually stop the attack. So today we're going to actually discuss about how we can prevent an attack by understanding the risks. Now, in terms of a cyber attack, we first need to understand it. So a cyber attack is pretty much a set of tactics or techniques that allow an attacker to breach your enterprise and either disrupt your activity or steal confidential or valuable data. Usually, an attacker, if in order to prevent a cyber attack, needs to go through some steps, and it's what we in the industry often call a kill chain. Now, there are several ways of describing a kill chain. However, for this presentation, we're going to use the MITRE defined kill chain. That's actually an industry standard. So how does a MITRE kill chain looks like? So they actually divided him into several steps, and as you can see, there are quite a lot of them. And pretty much they refer to the following. So initial access means all of the techniques that allow an adversary to gain access to your victim infrastructure. Now you can think about initial access as, either a phishing email, either having access to a zero-day exploit that allows you to remotely execute some code on your victim's computer. Now, execution are pretty much the steps that an adversary performs to run its malicious payload into the victim's infrastructure. There are several sub-techniques in this case. However, to clearly understand it, pretty much means running scripts, preparing your infrastructure, downloading other malicious components, and so on. It's all part of the execution. Persistence. So once you gain access to your victim's computer, the next thing you have to do is make sure that if somebody actually restart your computer or reboot your system, you're still going to have access to that computer and you're still going to be able to control it. Now, all of the techniques that are going to help you achieve this are part of the persisting step. Privilege escalation. Usually, whenever an attacker targets a company, it's not an administrator endpoint. It's usually somebody that doesn't have too much permissions. So in order to gain access to more or to be able to move within the organization, you need to obtain some extra privileges. Now, all of these techniques are part of this privilege escalation component. Usually, this actually means that you're going to start as a normal user and elevate yourself to the administrative privileges so that you can actually do more or control more of that environment. Defense evasion. That's also a really important one. Nowadays, pretty much everybody has a security product, and that security product might interfere with what you're doing there. So one thing that a lot of attackers actually do is to disable that security product. Now, this can be done really easy. If you're an administrator, you can actually try to stop the services. But there are several tools like Process Hacker that can be used to disable the product, allowing you to continue your attack without being impacted by that product. Credential access. Well, you reach a point where you kind of need other passwords or credential that can be found in that system. Usually an administrator password, but others that still have a lot of or have other credential that allows you to access other resources are still okay. So all of the methods that can be used to gain some passwords or credential are part of this. Just to explain a simple one, you can use Minicat to drop some passwords from the Windows memory, and then look at them and hope to find one that's for an administrator. But even if you don't find one, you can still find others for other computers in the network, and you can replicate the same steps there. Now, discovery is the next one. Your attack starts with one endpoint, but your goal usually is to gain information or to disrupt the entire network. Now, if you want to do this, you kind of need to understand how that victim's organization works. So discovery is a step where you understand its network, you understand when every endpoint is started, you understand what is the logistic within that organization. And once you do this, you can move to the next step, to the lateral movement, because now you know how or where you have to go. What's your next victim within that organization? You don't want to, select a victim that's, just as limited in terms of permission as the one that you already infected. You rather are more interested in, selecting another endpoint or another network point from where you're going to have better visibility or access to more data. Collection. Collection is a component where relevant data that can be collected. Now, relevant data could mean a lot. Could mean if you're interested in stealing data, everything, documents with or documents, programs, software, everything that can be extracted from that point. Collection can also mean documents that explain how you should actually behave within that environment. When you should do something, when you should reply to an email and stuff like this. Everything that can allow you to understand how that organization works. Connection to the command and control. So usually you're not going to do this automatically. You're going to have a connection to one of your CNC servers, and on each step of the way, you're still going to report back and communicate some of the things you are able to do. Now, exfiltration is pretty much straightforward. Usually means that the confidential data or the interesting data that you manage to gather from the victim's infrastructure are going to be sent. And finally, we have impact. Usually this actually refers to the kind of things you can do that's going to disrupt the victim business. Now, of course, exfiltration is as important, but usually this step refers to ransomware, encrypting files, and this kind of stuff, asking for a ransom and so on. So, looking at this, one thing that has to be understood at this point is that it's not a linear flow. It's not like an attack usually goes from one point to another the way they are described in the MITRE matrix. Rather, it's a little bit, it's more like a tree. So usually you start with initial access, go to execution, CNC defense, evasion, persisting, privilege escalation, credential access discovery, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, and finally impact. And this is how actually a regular attack looks like. But in reality, pretty much every combination is possible. So, you can go from execution directly to impact. If you think about ransomware, it's actually what they do. The moment you get infected, they start encrypting your file. They don't wait for this. And from every step, you pretty much need to connect to your command and control. You kind of need persisting whenever you're going to breach another endpoint from within that organization, and so on. So there are so many steps an attacker can do in so many differences. So let's discuss a little bit about risk now that we know how an attack generally looks like. And we're still going to use this matrix. And let's take the first one, the initial access. So MITRE actually explain this through the following techniques. And we're going to take the first one, phishing, that pretty much refers to a way of an attack. And phishing, to simply put it, it's an email sent from outside the company that made to look like a legitimate email, but that actually has either a malicious attachment, like a zip file, a document, or something that can actually start the attack, or an URL to a phishing page where you're going to leak some credential. Usually those are the two cases. Now, in both of these cases, there is a must here. The user has to be fooled by that email, and it has to click and open that email. Without it, the attack cannot actually happen. So who is the target in this case? Because it pretty much means that you kind of need a specific type of user. So usually you're going to look at people from within that organization that are accustomed to receive this kind of external emails, like somebody from the human resource department. They receive a CV pretty much every day. So what's another one that's disguised as a CV that actually has a document? It's very likely that somebody from the department is going to open it. Now, another way of attacking this is go to people from that organization that you know that might lack some security knowledge or might easily be fooled by this. Somebody that doesn't work in the technical department or stuff like this. Or you can actually go to somebody from the C-level and or VPs from that organization. Now, it's possible that they might have a better understanding of the security, but if you manage to fool at least one of them, you don't have to perform the other steps. It's very likely that the type of data that you're actually interested in might already be there on that laptop. So you don't need to breach other endpoints. You don't need to find your way to the golden goose to say you already have access to all of the data. Now let's see a quick example here. That's actually one for a couple of days ago. So if you look closely, it looks like an email that was sent to one of the organizations that we protect, where they actually said that, hey, we finished a meeting. Here are the meeting details, and they provided a SharePoint link. However, it's not a SharePoint link. In reality, it's something that leads to another link to a hacked website from Netherlands, where you're actually going to be posted with a picture like this one that actually asks you to, provide the password, and that password is going to be exfiltrated. Now, once you have access to that password, it's really easy to connect to the SharePoint or Office 365 and exfiltrate data directly from there. So pretty easy, and all you have to do is just fool somebody. Now, if we look at other tactics that can be used for initial access, let's take removable media, for example. Pretty much means you need an USB or removable media that has some executable or malicious payload there. Usually, this actually means that you're going to leverage the auto-run feature. But again, in order for this to happen, the user has to insert that USB device, that USB device into its laptop. And it's not the only thing that has to happen for the attack to succeed. You kind of need the system to be configured in such a way that auto-run is automatically executed whenever USB is inserted. So without those two components, the attack cannot go any further. Let's take another one. Let's look right now at the execution. And in this case, let's take the app exploitation. So usually app exploitation refers to application that have, certain or known vulnerability like Adobe, Flash, Java, or even operating system that can be leveraged by an attacker to run some code. So, assuming I know that the victim has a specific version of Adobe that I know that is vulnerable to a certain type of exploit, then I can handcraft a document that looks like something that the victim is going to open with that vulnerability, and I can actually make him run my code in there. But again, in order for me to do this, I need to make sure that he or she have vulnerable system. So again, we can also see another risk here. And since there are so many techniques here, I'm going to fast jump to the credential access, and I'm only going to look at one case, the brute force, because we can actually discuss a couple of different scenarios here. So first one, a brute force can succeed because you as a user use or have a very weak password, like password from one letter or a password that's really known to everybody, like password or just something from a couple of letters and stuff like this. But and if you do something like this, then it's really easy for an attacker to, brute force his way into your computer. At the same time, this is also a problem of internal policies. If your administrator allows you to have this kind of passwords, then this is another issue. At the company level, there should be some policies that clearly state that you need to use, a strong password and some rules on how you have to select your password, like a minimum of 9 letters, use big letters, capital letters, and so on. And it's also another component of risk, and it's less about the actual risk, at least in the terms we have discussed right now, but more in terms of how you protect yourself. If you don't have a network interceptor, if you don't have a network scanner, how are you going to see that somebody is trying to brute force your way into your computer? And if you don't see it, because you cannot say that it's going to succeed in the first time. No, it might require 200 attempts. Now, by that time, you might be able to do something about it. You might be able to apply some firewall rules or something. But you kind of need this. And if you don't have something like this, then you're actually taking a risk. Now, providing this, let's say, or let's discuss what are actually the risks. And from our point of view, we kind of split risk into 4 categories. Now, the first one is what we call an incorrect setup or a misconfiguration or incorrect policies. Now, this can be seen from 2 points of view. So one is at the local endpoint where, you either have some issues related to your operating system, like the OSCI is disabled, you don't have the proper settings for Samba v3, or you actually don't have, or you actually have some setups that will say your LSASS process that passwords can be kept in plain text into your memory. Now, again, this can actually be set at the local settings, but if not, then it's going to be easier for an attacker. And if we are to discuss about the last one, the passwords, there is a tool that's usually very common among attackers. It's called Minicats, that pretty much is used to dump passwords from memory. Now, if the passwords are kept in plain text in memory, then pretty much the attacker's effort is really it's really easy for the attacker, because all he has to do is just read the password and further go. But there are some settings in Windows where you can actually explicitly say that you're not going to store the passwords in plain text, but you're actually going to store hashes. So the attacker can still drop the memory, but is going to drop some hashes. So he has to brute force the hashes. So it's not going to be as easier for him as just having the plain text passwords. Now, other settings that might be relevant here are, settings related to Office, settings related to browsers. So, every Microsoft Office has a feature, or, you can say bug or feature that relates to macros. Now, if a macro is enabled, you're not going to be prompted automatically asking you if you want to run macros, but the Visual Basic code from that document is going to automatically be executed. However, this can also be set up, so it pretty much depends on the local policy and the administrator to do this. Now, other type of incorrect setups are those related to network settings. Now, you can have like an open share or a Samba share somewhere where everybody can write and read stuff. Now, it's really easy. It could be fun for everybody because it's a sharing point where I can send documents to my colleague. But let's think a little bit from an attacker point of view. If he or she needs a point where everybody can see, where everybody can have access, it's that. They can actually copy their code there. They can actually copy and rename the code so that it looks like something other people are going to click on. And this is a really easy way of performing a lateral movement without actually doing too much. Other type of things, well, vulnerability assessment, and that's pretty much quite common. In this case, we need to discuss about common application like Adobe Office, or making sure that you have the KBs for operating system. Or in case of a public-facing app, like a web server, make sure that you have the latest version. Make sure that you don't have known vulnerabilities that can be exploited. This is in particular important for public-facing app because there are a lot of scanners out there that actively looks at what you have installed on your public-facing endpoints. And if you have something with a vulnerability, you're pretty much an easy target. External risk. And actually, this is a more like a continuation from the previous one. External risk means something we cannot truly control. And the most common one are, breach likelihood or vulnerable service discover probability. This pretty much means that, whenever you, let's say that you have a, web service that's vulnerable, and somebody's actually going to scan you and find this, then pretty much you're a sure victim. It's really easy for them to attack you. It's really easy because they already know a way to get into your computer. Now, other similar risks are the one related to verticals. Now, in this case, and whenever we're talking about verticals, if we are part of the health, let's say, industry, and we know that there are several attacks that are part of the health industry, then it's very likely that something similar is going to happen to us as well. And the fourth one, and maybe the most important one, is the human factor. Because in so many cases, this is actually one of the most important things that help an attacker to achieve its goal. Now, it can be either bad security practices, like, really weak password, or use the same password for the same for all of the accounts, or, the lack of security knowledge, like, prone to open a phishing email. Or it can be something even simple, like, having access to a lot of data, but not knowing about this. So human, and the risk that human produce is something quite impressive that needs to be taken into consideration. So yeah, knowing this, it's good, but it's not enough, because we know that we have a risk. Now we need to mitigate it. So what we actually need is a risk assessment tool. And if we have something like this, then we can at least list all of the risks that our company has. We also need the local security layer and a layer security, like, network, local, EDR, and so on. And this is actually really important. We need a response mechanism for risk management. A response mechanism for risk management means that, if I see a vulnerable application, I need to be able to patch it. If I see, some incorrect configuration on someone's laptop, I need to be able to fix them. If I see some bad practices at some user, I need to be able to find a way to solve it. Either a security awareness training, or, reduce the security access or something like this. But I need to be able to act according to the risk that I see. And if we have all of this combined, then you can actually have a security posture, or a proper security posture. So, coming back to the attack schematics that we provide, let's discuss a little bit how all of this type of risk impact the MITRE matrix. So, in terms of incorrect setup policy, well, again, execution is one of them. Of course, if you defensive evasion, another one. Credential access. Well, let's think a little bit. If you have, let's say, a very weak password, for example, then you can definitely achieve credential access. Or, if you're just an administrator on the company computer, where instead of being a guest or something like this. Vulnerability assessment, also important. Of course, execution would not be possible, execution in terms of malware, if you have everything patched. In terms of credential access, there are several techniques where you can get access to privileged data, but that are actually patched by the operating system. If you don't apply those patches, an attacker can actually gain access to the same data. And again, for the lateral movement, well, if you have like an application that can be used to either brute force, or either where has a very specific exploit that nobody patched, then it can be used to achieve lateral movement. External risk. Well, in this case, we're going to actually look at the first one. So either initial access, or either the connection to the CNC. And yeah, it's hard to complain, but if you manage to, to mitigate the external risk, you're pretty much going to be able to stop the attack at the initial phases. And let's see the human factor. So of course, initial access, that's pretty much the most important. If you're careful and you're not going to click on that spear phishing email, then you're going to stop that email at that point. Now, credential access is also another important one. Again, if you have weak passwords or stuff like this, then it's going to be easier for somebody to gain access to your credential. Otherwise, it's going to be harder. And in a similar way for lateral movement. Now, instead of talking about this, let's take a little example and discuss what could have happened in that case. And I'm going to discuss about an attack that was performed by Carbona Group. They are notorious for banks attacks, and usually they make use of spear phishing techniques and use different vulnerabilities, even old one, to gain access to different systems. And they are considered to be responsible for attacks against more than 100 banks in 40 countries. So let's see how the attack actually goes in this case with this guy. So we have an attacker that usually sends an email, usually a phishing vulnerability with certain payloads. Now, if you look at the exploits that they're using are quite old, like 3 or 2 years old. Now, once it reaches the victim's computer, then it's going to use one of their framework, the Cobalt Strike framework, and they are going to dump passwords from memory and then use those passwords to find an administrator password. And if they find it, then they're going to connect to the domain controller. Now, from that domain controller, they're going to search for an administrator computer and then infect it, and then search for the company web server. And usually they actually reuse former SSH connection. This is something common. So they search for an administrator that's not careful enough, and they reuse its connection. The next step will be from the domain controller to send a command to all of the computers from the organization and ask them to copy all of the documents that they have to the company web server. Now, why is this? Because it's the easiest way for an attacker to exfiltrate sensitive data. It's going to use the same channel, the same computer that the companies use with their clients to send documents, valid documents, not critical one, to their client, to send critical documents from them. It's really hard for them to be discovered. Now, if we were to look at this attack, let's see what kind of risks are actually here and what would have happened if we actually prevented them. So the first one, it's human-based risks. So if the initial employee of that bank would have paid more attention to that phishing email, we would have not be in this situation. The attack would have stopped at that point. The second one is patch management. Even if the user clicked on the that document, the attacker actually rely on the fact that the Microsoft Office that they have there was actually unpatched. So based on this, the exploit was actually workable. Credential leakage. Well, the attacker was actually able to dump passwords in plain text from the memory. Now, this can also be fixed, and make sure that at least you make the attacker job harder. Another issue, and sometimes this is an issue, is that some computers from that organization were using Windows XP. It's not really safe, and it could be because of financial reasons, but it happened, and this actually makes an attacker job easier. Now, the third one is accessing to the domain controller. Now, I'm not going to say that there are very specific risk indicators here. However, not having a security solution or something that monitors access or what kind of commands are run to the domain controller is a big risk, because usually there are a handful of people that actually work there with a very particular schedule. So any type of anomaly detection should be able to detect it. And fourth, but again, very important, improper or incorrect usage of SSH connection actually allowed an attacker to reuse it and thus gain access to the company web server. So let's discuss a little bit about a conclusion and how we can actually prevent the cyber attack. And again, we're going to start with the MITRE attack. And if you look here, we're going to see that there are so many techniques for each one of these steps. It's more than 180 in total, and each one of them actually has at least 2 or 3 sub-techniques that can be used. This means that an attacker has a really comprehensive, let's say, suite of tests that can be that can be performed. So from our point of view, we kind of need to make sure that we reduce the attack surface. Now, one key thing here is prevention is always better or prefer than protection, meaning that if we can make sure that we're never going to reach a point where we get infected, it's always better than having a way to protect against this. Again, protection is still a must. Only a multi-layer solution will actually help us, and we shouldn't assume that if we have a prevention, we don't need protection. So, what should we do in order to have a proper security posture in this case? We need risk assessment capabilities, meaning misconfiguration, meaning a way to analyze vulnerabilities, a vulnerability assessment tool, a way to analyze policies and setup, and a human factor analytics. We also need a multi-layer security protection, meaning a network scanner, an on-access pre-execution, dynamic and behavioral analysis sandboxes, and yes, even if it's not protection, an EDR at least to gain some information in time about some of the things that could happen. And finally, but also really important, risk mitigation capabilities, security awareness training, patch management, firewall rules, and the ability to do this, and policy management. Without it, if we actually manage to combine all of these three, we can actually have a pretty good security posture and a pretty good security solution that actually helps our users. So hopefully you enjoy this presentation and you actually learn a little bit more about risks and the concept of prevention versus protection and how you can actually reduce the attack surface. Now, if you have other questions, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to reply and explain further about different type of risks or different type of techniques that can be used to reduce the attack surface. Thank you.